James, what's up, buddy? So, anyways, I finally got to replying to you. I just didn't want to BS my way through it. I wanted to really think about it and make sure I could present some kind of articulation to it. I think it was a loaded question. I think you were trying to be tricky, but maybe not. I don't know. Let me get right into this. You were talking about there's a couple insinuations you're making as far as God being immutable. God creating out of need, therefore there could be, or if he wasn't creating out of need, there could be no real reason for us to be here. So let me address the immutability issue first. When Christians say God is immutable, I think generally what they mean and what I mean is that God's character is immutable. He never changes. He doesn't change what he values either. When God makes decisions, that doesn't imply that God is not immutable. I think that's oversimplifying it. And the thing we got to look at is, what is he changing his mind about? What essentially is he changing? Let's say, for instance, that let's say you take this pastor or whatever, and he is looking at porn. In his conscience, he knows he shouldn't be doing it. And there's like this internal struggle going on. He's got a family, and he's made vows, quote unquote, and he's got a job to do. He's got to have integrity with what he's doing. So let's say a whole year passes by, and he keeps struggling with this. But he's not doing anything about it, even though he knows he should. I would say that in this way, God is dealing with him through his conscience. He knows that he shouldn't be doing this, but he keeps doing it anyway. So, unbeknownst to him, God has determined that if this pastor doesn't stop doing what he's doing, God is going to bring some events into his life that will hold him accountable. He's going to expose him in some way so that this pastor will have to deal with this, because he's not listening. He's not listening to what he should be doing. So God determines this. But before God determines this, he basically, through this man's conscience, notifies him, you need to stop. You need to stop. And let's say this pastor repents. He stops doing it. He comes to his senses. And he realizes this: if he keeps doing this, some trouble's going to come of it. It's going to be worse for him in the end than if he quits or changes his ways. So God relents of exposing this pastor, or whatever it was. It may not even be that. So God relents of what he was determining. Does that mean God is not immutable because of this? God's character, again, I would argue that's immutable. So basically, his immutable character means that he will not change his mind about what he values. It doesn't mean that he will not change his mind at all. He changes his mind in proportion to how he interacts with us. And how he interacts with us is determined by our decision making, whether we do the right thing or not. And I don't want to get into Euthyphro's dilemma and all that, but essentially that's what I would say as far as God being immutable goes. So the pastor changed his decisions, his choices. God changed his how he was going to interact with him accordingly. So it's not that when God changed his mind, he's not his essential character hasn't changed. He changed how he was going to interact with this person. And the same could be anything. It could be somebody who's embezzling at work. It could be you see a lot of these politicians. They get exposed. They keep dabbling in something they know they shouldn't be dabbling in, and then a turn of events happens to where they get exposed. And I guarantee the whole time that these politicians are dabbling in these things, like having affairs on their wife, they know they shouldn't be doing this. But they don't listen to that. They eventually they become stubborn to that, and look what happens. It blows up in their face. So I would argue that God's character is immutable, not the fact that he changes his mind. I think he changes his mind according to his character. Whatever decision he makes in accordance with our choices, it stems from his character. Whether he chooses to bless somebody or to expose somebody or judge somebody, that all of that flows out of his immutable character. And I want to argue really quick right now too, and I'm not sure if anyone else has argued for this, but I'm going to. I would argue that God has to deal with us in real time. If we are destined to fellowship with God now and for eternity, he's going to deal with us in real time. As far as it being a genuine interaction, I would ask the question, how else could God deal with us or interact with us unless it is somehow on our level of perception and comprehension? And I believe strongly that God gives us the space to be, and also to be what we are. He interacts with that within that framework. So I wanted to tie that into this as well. And as far as creating out of a need goes, I think that's what you're getting at. God, how can God create out of a need? Which would imply that he's not perfect or he's not complete. But I would say that God does not create out of a need to fill a lack. I would say that a necessary aspect to God's personality or being is creative potency. God creates. It's a part of who he is and what he does. So he's acting according to what he is, what makes God God, what's part of him. And an example I would bring up to this is Picasso, or any other artist or musician, even yourself. Picasso had a creative aspect to his personality. Creativity made up what he was. He was acting in accordance to what essentially was his makeup. And that's not creating out of a need. You're not doing it to fill a need. You're doing it because that's part of who you are. And I would say the same thing goes for God. And as far as purpose goes, you're basically saying that since God isn't creating out of a need, there is no purpose. There's no real ultimate reason. Let me try to rework this a little better. Maybe this will get you to understand. So God doesn't create out of need. I would say that. But I would say that whatever God creates is going to be contingent upon his goodness. The Bible says that God is love. So whatever God creates will be contingent on that quality about himself. He's going to create out of what he is, by what he is, for what he is. And he's going to interact with what he creates out of that essential nature. So if God creates sentient beings, their purpose and reason will ultimately be contingent on God's goodness and love. Since that is essentially what he is, it will stem out of that some way, I think. But your use of the word arbitrary is kind of tricky. I guess you could say that what God creates or the reasons he creates is arbitrary, but only if you mean arbitrary as in ultimately good. And I hope this better articulates my point. Thank you.